Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. O'Keefe, John O'Keefe, present and accounted for here at the readings of Sign of the Beaver. Welcome. I have continued on my adventure. I have left the Great Plains of Oklahoma, crossed over those long panhandle Great Plains into parts of New Mexico. And then we started feeling the rise. We started feeling the rise in elevation. We started seeing different animals, the antelope. We started seeing more deer. We started seeing different kinds of birds than we're used to seeing. And more importantly, you also start noticing a lot of different kinds of trees. See that? Look at that thing. Oh! That is a Ponderosa Pine. Also, behind me, you can start seeing the young quaking aspens. You can see the mountains. We are in the lovely state of Colorado. Welcome. It is good to be with you here. One of the things that I love about a Ponderosa Pine is look at its red. Look at that red that's going on. It's very different, very dry. And the other thing that you need to understand about a Ponderosa when you finally get to see one in your lifetime, because I do hope that you do. This is so perfect for while we're reading Sign of the Beaver. But one of the things that I absolutely love to do when I'm near a Ponderosa Pine is, this is called sloughing. It's cracking as the tree gets bigger, you know, like you have these big sloughs. But if you stick your nose in, take a really big whiff. It smells like vanilla. Oh, it's so beautiful. And I think I have found an absolutely perfect place along the Conojos River here for us to read our next 2 chapters of Sign of the Beaver. Very exciting period of time, and I also want to let you know that I have a feeling that today is going to be a really, really good place. I have found a place where there's this beautiful nurse log that has fallen, and its stump right here. Look at that, it's stump right here. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set up right there. I've got my notebook, I've got my book, I've got my pen, and I'm ready to do some unbelievable reading in a beautiful place. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set you down right about here, and you're gonna be able to see the Conojos River behind me the entire time that we do our reading. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna use this beautiful tree as a nice sit-back spot. Hopefully, maybe you'll be able to see some amazing animals as I start doing my reading today. I'm gonna let you know that it has been a week since we left Georgia. The temperature here is about 70 degrees, 73 degrees. The river is flowing high right now because it's gotten some water and the snow runoff. We had just finished a hike, which has been really cool. Up in the alpine areas, and the alpine areas themselves still have lots of snow. So we were walking across big, open, wonderful snow piles and stuff like that. And it's May 31st. Tomorrow we begin June, which is deep summertime for us down in the south. But here in Colorado, things are just starting to wake up. And I love being here. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Sign of the Beaver. It is time for the moment of truth. Last time that we read, chapter 14, if I'm not mistaken, finished with a very important statement, which was, on the day of their greatest adventure. And that is where we begin today. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, get yourself your notebook, get yourself settled in. Remember that we had just finished the story of Gluckskabe. We had also recognized that both Matt's world and Attean's world have stories of floods. And I will say that behind me as this river rolls, you can see that I'm on a big floodplain. And if the water filled enough or got enough water, that this whole area that I would be in would be pretty much underwater. But today, ladies and gentlemen, it is not, and it is our reading time. We are at chapter 15, and chapter 15 begins with these essential words. On the day of their greatest adventure, Attean had come without his dog, so there was no warning. I should just stop there. I'm just kidding. Matt was in fine spirits that day because he had managed by a magnificent stroke of luck to hit a rabbit with his bow and arrow. Nice job, Matt. It was the first time this had happened, and it was more the rabbit's doing than his own. The silly creature had just sat there and let him take careful aim. All the same, he was pleased with himself, and even more pleased that Attean had been there to see it. When the boys decided to visit the beaver dam again, Matt was unwilling to leave the rabbit behind in case some thieving animal should come and discover it. He was walking behind Attean, swinging the rabbit carelessly by the ears as Attean always did. When the Indian suddenly halted, his whole body tensed. Matt could see nothing unusual, and he had opened his mouth to speak when Attean silenced him with a jerk of his hand. Then he heard a sound in the underbrush ahead. Not a rustle like a grouse or a snake. They're too small. Not a trapped animal. This was a stirring of something moving slowly and something heavily. He felt a cold prickle in his stomach. He stood beside Attean, his own muscles tight, scarcely breathing. A low bush bent sideways. Through the leaves, a brown head thrust itself through. Bigger than that of a dog and shaggier, it was a small bear cub. Matt could see the little eyes peering at them curiously, the brown nose wrinkling at the strange smell of human boy. The little animal looked so comical that Matt almost laughed out loud. Psst! Attean warned under his breath. There was a crashing of bush and a low, snarling growl. An immense paw reached through the thicket and tumbled the cub over and out of sight. In its place loomed a huge brown shape. Bursting through the leaves was a head 3 times as big as the cub's. No curiosity in those small eyes, only an angry, reddish gleam. Somehow, Matt had the sense not to run. He stood frozen on the path. A bear could overtake a running man in just a few bounds, and this one was only 2 bounds away. The bear's head moved slowly from side to side. Its heavy body brushed aside the branches as though they were cobwebs. It swayed, shifting its weight from one foot to the other. Slowly, it rose on its hind legs. Matt could see the wicked curving claws. You mean like those? I know you don't want me to stop, but I want to be right in this moment. This is the moment. Matt would never know why he acted as he did. He could not remember thinking at all, only staring with numb horror at the creature about to charge. Somehow, he did move. He swung the dead rabbit by its ears and hurled it straight at the bear's head. The tiny body struck the bear squarely on its nose. With a jerk of her head, the bear shook it off as though it were a buzzing mosquito. The rabbit flopped useless to the ground. The bear did not even bother to look down at it. She had been distracted for only an instant, but in that instant, something flashed through the air. There was a sharp twang and the dull thud of a blow. Just between the eyes of the bear, the shaft of Attean's arrow quivered. As the waving forepaws began to lower, a second arrow struck just below the bear's shoulder. The great head shuddered and sank toward the ground. With a wild yell, Attean sprang forward and thrust his knife deep just behind his first arrow, which is right there, right in his head. First arrow, still scarcely aware that he moved at all. Matt leapt after him, jerking his own knife from his belt. He sank it into the brown fur. His blow had been misplaced, but it was not needed. The bear's sides were heaving. The boys stood watching, and in a few moments, the bear lay still. Matt stared down at the creature in horror. The fearsome yellow teeth were still bared in a snarl. Saliva and blood dribbled down from the open jaws. The little eyes that had glittered so savagely were filmed over. The long, sharp claws hung powerless, clotted with pawed-up earth. Now that there was nothing to fear, Matt felt his knees shaking. He hoped that Attean would not notice, and he managed a wide grin to hide his trembling. But Attean did not grin back. He stood over the bear, and he began to speak, slowly and solemnly. In his own tongue, he spoke for a long time. "What were you saying?" Matt demanded when the speaking finally was over. "I tell bear, I do not want to kill," Attean answered. "Indian not kill she-bear with cub. I tell bear we did not come here to hunt." "But it might have killed us both. Maybe. I ask bear to forgive that I must kill." Well, I'm mighty thankful you did, Matt said stoutly. He was about to say that he had never been so scared in his life, but he thought better of it. Attean looked at him, and his solemnness suddenly dissolved in a grin. You move quick, he said, like Indian. Did you hear that? Attean looked at him, and his solemnness suddenly dissolved in a grin. You move quick, he said, like Indian. I love it. Matt felt his cheeks turn red. You killed him, he said honestly, yet he knew that he had had a part. He had given Attean just enough time in which to notch his arrow. Attean nudged the bear with his toe. Small, he said, just same fat, good for eat. Small? That monstrous creature? It certainly was too big for two boys to carry away. It appeared that Attean had no intention of trying. Belongs squaw now, he said. I go tell. Squaw. That was one of the words in my glossary. Squaw, I wrote as female, right? Female. Yeah. Squaw, female. Squaw. Squaws now. Belongs squaw now, he said. I go tell. You mean a squaw is going to carry that heavy thing? Cut up meat, then carry. Squaw work. Attean answered. It was plain that he had done the man's work and was finished with it. The cub, Matt remembered now. It was nowhere in sight. Attean shook his head. Let cub go, he said. When Sigwan come again, him plenty big to eat. Take rabbit, Attean reminded him. Sigwan come again, him plenty big to eat. Attean shook his head. Let cub go, he said. When Sigwan come again, him plenty big to eat. Take rabbit, Attean reminded him. Sigwan, S-I-G-W-A-N. Sigwan. I don't have any answer for what that word means. Sigwan. I have to write it down. Sigwan. S-I-G-W-A-N, question mark. These are context clues. I'm trying to kind of figure out what Sigwan might mean. When Sigwan come again. Not quite sure. Matt looked with distaste at the rabbit, almost covered by the bear's heavy paw, the fur matted and bloody. He would rather not have touched it, but obediently, he pulled the rabbit out. It was his dinner after all, and he knew that in Attean's world, everything that was killed must be used. The Indian did not kill for sport. When Attean had disappeared into the forest, Matt still stood, looking down at the first bear he had ever seen. He felt resentful. Attean had killed the bear. Of course, it was his by right, but Matt would have liked just a small share of that meat, or even one of those big claws to show his father. Then he remembered the Indian boy's tribute. He had moved fast, like an Indian. That would have to be share enough. He just got a compliment. Did you hear that? He just got a compliment. The amazing thing that happened is that's chapter 15. Chapter 15 is about halfway through this book. The fact that the two of them worked together in order to save themselves, that's going to be an amazing piece. The fact that Attean apologized for killing, that's something that I take. I feel heartbroken about that cub because there was no meaning for that moment to happen. Nobody intended that moment to happen. But I start thinking a little bit too about the fact that that same day, Matt gets his first rabbit with his bow. Without the rabbit, he wouldn't have had the time for Attean to notch his arrow and be able to kill the bear, which is amazing. Chapter 16. In the late afternoon, Matt sat in the cabin doorway. He couldn't think of any work to do. He felt restless, the excitement still jumping about inside him. He needed to talk to someone. He wanted to tell his father about the bear. Thinking of his father, he felt that snake of worry crawling about behind every other thought. That worry was becoming more frequent every day. What could keep his father for so long? Suppose some accident had befallen him. The meeting with the bear had shaken Matt's trust in the forest. Now it seemed to close him in on every side, dark and threatening. Suppose his father had met with a bear. Suppose he had never got back to Quincy. How would his mother ever know where to find this place, or even where to send anyone to look for him? Matt hugged his arms around his chest, but the cold was inside. It would not go away. Something moved at the edge of the wood. Matt leapt to his feet. A stranger came walking into the clearing. With an ugly chill against his backbone, Matt stared at the hideously painted face. Then he recognized Attean, a very different Attean from the boy who had walked with him in the forest that same morning. The Indian boy had washed his body, and it shone with fresh grease. He had combed his tangled black locks. Down his cheeks on either side and on his forehead ran broad streaks of blue and white paint. On a cord around his neck dangled a row of new bear claws. In case Attean had noticed his first alarm, Matt greeted him boldly. "What's the war paint for?" he demanded. "Not war paint," Attean answered. "Squaws make feast with bear. My grandfather say you come." Matt hesitated, unable to believe his ears. It took him a moment to realize that this was actually an invitation. "Thanks," he stammered. I'd sure like some of that bear meat. Wait till I go get my jacket." "Shut door," Attean reminded him. "Maybe another bear come." Attean was in good humor. He had made one of his unexpected jokes. "Haha, shut door. What happened last time that Matt forgot to shut the door?" Yeah, Attean's getting him a little bit. "Long way," Attean said after a time. Matt was certain that they must have been walking fast for more than an hour. He remembered that Attean had already walked all this way to come and get him, and he kept silent. It was so dark now that he could barely see to put one foot before the other, but he realized that they were on a well-beaten trail. Just as the last light was glinting above the treetops, they reached a riverbank. Drawn up at its edge was a small birch canoe. Attean motioned Matt to step into it. Then he gave a push and leaped nimbly into the stern. His paddle moved soundlessly. Grateful to sit still, Matt was entranced by the speed, the silence, the gliding shadow on the silver river. He was regretful when in a very few strokes they reached the other side of the river. Now Matt could see a glimmer of light deep in the woods. Attean led him toward it, and presently their way was barred by a solid wall of upright posts, a stockade. For the first time, a quiver of uneasiness made Matt falter. Sorry, I just had a couple bugs crawl all over me, and right at the moment I got nervous. I'm going to reread that because my brain was someplace else. Now Matt could see a glimmer of light deep in the woods. Attean led him toward it, and presently their way was barred by a solid wall of upright posts, a stockade. For the first time, a quiver of uneasiness made Matt falter, but stronger than any doubt, curiosity drove him on. Not for one moment would he have turned back. Eagerly, he followed Attean through a gateway into an open space filled with smoke and moving shadows and wavering patches of light cast by birch bark torches. All around him in a circle rose the dim shapes of cabins and cone-shaped wigwams. In the center of the circle, a long, narrow fire was burning between walls of logs. Suspended on timbers hung 3 iron pots, sending up rosy curls of steam in the smoky air. The fragrance of boiling meat and pungent herbs made Matt's stomach crawl. I need to stop for a quick second. I want you to think about what an opportunity Matt is being graced right now. It is very unusual for a native tribe to invite outsiders in for a lot of various reasons, especially at this time, especially when sicknesses were something that were to be of big concern. The entrance into a sacred space of the native homeland would be an extremely special opportunity for Matt. And as Matt is doing this, he's very, very conscientious of his opportunity. So now we've been given the setting, the layout. If you need to, go back and reread that part. I think it's really important to make sure that you have your place. If you have the setting laid out, then you're going to be able to see what happens more often and quicker. So you'll be able to really be a part of entering this place with Matt. So now let's find out what happens next. Then he became aware of the Indians. They sat silently on either side of the fire, their painted faces ghastly in the flickering light. They were clad in an odd medley of garments. Some were wearing Englishmen's coats and jackets, others with bright blankets draping their shoulders. A few had feathers standing straight up from headbands. Everywhere there was a gleam of metal on arms and chests. Women in bright cloth skirts and odd-pointed caps moved about without a sound, adding wood to the fire or stirring the contents of the kettles. Light glinted on their silver armbands and necklaces. Clearly the Indians had put on their finest array for this feast. It came over Matt with a rush of shame, how very shabby he must look in their eyes. Even if Attean had warned him, what could he have done? He had no other clothes to wear. Probably Attean had known that and so had said nothing. No one seemed to notice Matt, yet he was very conscious of the unblinking stare of the row facing him. The others did not turn their heads. They seemed to be waiting. In the silence, Matt's heart beat so loudly they all surely must have heard it. After a long pause, one man rose slowly and came toward him. It was Saknus. His painted, streaked face was barely recognizable. He wore a long red coat decorated by a handsome beaded collar and metal armbands. A crowd of feathers rose from the beaded band around his forehead. He stood very tall, and there was pride in his stern features. Why, Matt thought, he looked like a king. "Kwe," Saknus said with dignity. "White boy, welcome." "Kwe." In a sudden terrifying yell, the rows of Indians echoed this greeting. "Tahoe!" they shouted. "Tahoe! Yay hi hi!" "Kwe," Matt stammered in return, and then more boldly. "Kwe." The Indians seemed satisfied. Smiles flashed in their dark faces. There was rough laughter, and then, seeming to forget him, they began to jabber to each other. From nowhere, children suddenly crowded around him, giggling, daring each other to touch him. Matt's heart slowed its pounding. There was nothing to fear in this place, but after the weeks of stillness in his cabin, the noise was confusing. He was grateful when Attean came to his rescue and led him to a seat at the edge of the log. An old woman approached and held out to him a gourd cup. It contained a sweetish drink, acid and flavored with maple sugar, good on his dry tongue. Saknus raised his arm, and instantly the clamor was silenced. The whole tribe was silent. There was no doubt Attean's grandfather was the leader here. An Indian brought him a long pipe, and Saknus put it to his lips and slowly blew out a long wreath of smoke. The rows of Indians waited respectfully for him to speak. Instead, the old man turned to his grandson and held out the pipe. Attean stepped into the center of the clearing. In the firelight, he stood straight and slender, his bare arms and legs gleaming. Matt had never seen him like this. Proudly, Attean took the pipe, set it briefly to his own lips, and handed it back to his grandfather. Then he began to speak. Matt did not need to understand the words. He soon realized that Attean was recounting the morning's adventure, watching his gestures. Matt felt himself living again the walk through the woods, the meeting with the small cub, the fearsome mother about to charge. As Attean spoke, the Indians urged the boy on with grunts and shouts of approval and pleasure. Attean tensed his body. He uttered a sharp cry, "Hoo!" pointed at Matt, and made a flinging sweep of his arms, hurling an imaginary rabbit. The seated figures broke into loud cries, shouting, "Heh!" grinning and pointing at Matt, swinging their own arms in imitation. Matt's cheeks felt hot. He knew that they were making fun of him, but boisterous as it was, the sound was friendly. The wind is so beautiful. But boisterous as it was, the sound was friendly. Now they turned back to Attean and followed his story with growing excitement. Attean certainly made a very good story of it. His telling took a lot longer than the actual event. Plainly, they all enjoyed it, and in listening, they were all taking part in it. Attean was a skillful storyteller. Matt could understand now just how he must have delighted all of his people with him acting out Robinson Crusoe. When the narrative was over, when the story was over, the Indians sprang to their feet. They formed a long line, then began to sound that sent a tingle, half dread, half pleasure, down Matt's spine. A lone Indian had leapt to the head of the line, beating a rattle against his palm in an odd, stirring rhythm. He strutted and pranced in ridiculous contortions, for all the world like a clown in a village fair. The line of figures followed after him, aping him and stamping their feet in response. Attean was at his side again. "Dance now," he said, "then feast." The rhythm of the rattle quickened. The line of the figures wove round the fire faster and faster. Women joined now, And at the end of the line, linking their arms, swaying. Finally, the children, even small children, were dancing, stamping their small naked feet. "Dance!" Attean commanded. He seized Matt's arm and pulled him into the moving line. The men near him cheered him on, laughing at Matt's stumbling attempts. Once he caught his breath, Matt found it simple to follow the step. His confidence swelled as the rhythm throbbed through his body, loosening his tight muscles. He was suddenly filled with excitement and happiness. His own heels pounded against the hard ground. He was one of them. He came back to earth with a stitch in his side. His legs threatened to give way under him. The dancing seemed to have no end. Determined that Attean should not see him weakening, he moved faster and stamped harder. Finally, when he felt he could not make the circle one more time, the whole dance and all the music ended. The feasting then began. A squaw brought him a wooden bowl filled with thick, hot stew and a curiously carved wooden spoon. The first steaming mouthful burned his tongue, but he was so hungry and he couldn't wait. He thought nothing had ever tasted so good, dark and greasy and spicy. So this was what bear meat tasted like. Presently, he noticed that Attean sat beside him, eating nothing. "You're not eating?" Matt asked, with a sudden doubt. "Have you given me your share?" "This is my bear," the boy answered. "I kill, not eat. Maybe not get any more bear." He didn't sound as if he minded it in the least, as if, in fact, he was proud of not eating bear. When Matt's bowl was empty, the squaw refilled it. By the time he finished, sleepiness began to drag at his eyelids. He could scarcely hold them open. Attean seemed in no hurry to leave this moment. The Indians were enjoying themselves, refilling their bowls, shouting at each other, laughing and slapping their legs at what seemed to be uproarious jokes. This was noisier than any celebration Matt had ever seen in Quincy, even on Muster Day. Question, what is Muster Day? I'm going to have to look that up. Why had he ever had the idea that Indians were so dull and boring? This was not dull. This was not boring. At last, however, the whole tribe fell silent, and Matt saw that one of them was beginning another story. It promised to be a very long one. Between the sentences, the speaker drew on the pipe, and the smoke curled from his nose and mouth as he spoke. Matt's head drooped and came up with a painful jerk. He had almost fallen asleep sitting up. Attean laughed and motioned him to his feet. At the thought of tramping all the way back to the cabin, Matt groaned. It must be close to midnight. Then he saw that Attean did not mean to take him back. He led Matt toward one of the wigwams and pulled back the flap of deerskin that hung across the door. Inside, a small fire burned, and by its faint light, Matt saw a low platform covered with matting and fur. Attean made a silent motion, and Matt, too sleepy to question, gratefully let his tired body sink down onto the soft animal skins. Attean stirred up the fire and left him alone. Once, long after, Matt roused to hear the rattle and the pounding of feet again. The Indians were once again dancing, and he was thankful to stay right where he was. Today, as I sit in this most beautiful of places, I want to take a brief moment and talk to you a little bit about some of the things that I came into experience while reading that. I don't know if many of you know this, but I want to introduce you to another joy and gift that had been graced to me earlier in my life, which was that I had the fortune of teaching at a school that was all Native peoples. It was called the Wahilut Indian School, and if anybody's out there representing from Wahilut, woohoo! I just want to say to you that it was one of the most impressive and amazing experiences in my life. Why, you ask? One, because I was invited into a culture that I never thought that I would ever have a chance to be a part of. They were a part of a larger group of different reservations that wrap around the Puget Sound. If you look on a map and look for Olympia, Washington, that's where I lived, and all the way up you'll see this big waterway that's a big salt space, but it's called the Sound. It's not quite the ocean. But so often was I introduced to different parts of a specific native culture that that also is shared throughout many native cultures, which is tobacco, sage, sweetgrass, prayer, song, the drum. All of these things are experienced within this story, in this moment. The importance that Attean had, that he had changed a little bit since killing that bear. And the way that Attean did not eat the bear. The way that everybody celebrated the bringing in of that bear to the family. The gift that Attean had brought them. The storytelling. Amazing storytelling. So many opportunities to stretch my understanding of what was most and what is most important. A fire in the center. Cleansing by smoking a small bit of tobacco, which is very different than smoking cigarettes. It's very different than chewing tobacco. It's very different than what we understand. A small amount of tobacco was a gift from that higher power, that God figure, and the opportunity of cleansing. And so in so many ways, this moment of being invited in brings me that opportunity to have been brought in to a culture that was not mine, and was an opportunity for me to understand at a greater depth the fortune of living rightly and being invited into certain circles after you've earned the privilege. We don't have the right to just walk in. And so for Matt, I find this part of the story to be tremendous. One, he had a part in that bear, the death of that bear. He tastes bear for the first time in this moment. The children are excited to see him because he's the first white person that many of them will have ever seen. And that means a lot of different things to us as people who live into the future. But in this moment, those children surround him and are amazed. As we continue our experience with Sign of the Beaver, I wanted to be in a place like this to read a most important moment in the story and the growing relationship between Attean and Matt. Do you see the difference right now? Do you see how things aren't perfect, but do you see how they are similar? Do you see how they are spending time together in very different ways than they did at the beginning? Did you hear the difference in sackness? You realize that actually the tribal chief or a leader of this tribe has the fortune of being one of the people who saved Matt's life. And that's going to come into a big part of the story later. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, as I continue to adventure on, I hope that you too continue to adventure on. We have just finished chapters 15 and 16 of Sign of the Beaver. Come back soon and see what we find coming up next. I hope you have a great afternoon. I hope you go outside and experience life for what it is. Just appreciate how simple it is and appreciate how great life can be. Go out and see something different, or go out and look at something very typical in your life, but try to see it in a different way. Without further ado, I love you. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you for being here again, and get out of here.